Welcome to the Strategic Plan, an audio series exploring 3 areas that are helping to shape bright, grounded, connected, and inspired students well beyond their years at Leo Baeck. We will dig into the topics of social, emotional well-being, and differentiated learning to see what these buzzwords are all about. And we will visit how teaching Jewish identity has adapted to meet changing times. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the show. Welcome back to the Strategic Plan audio series. My name is Toby Gottlieb. I'm your host, former Leo Baeck student, graduating class of 1999. This episode focuses on academic excellence, specifically on differentiated learning to ensure all types of learners and personal experiences, interests, and beliefs are leveraged to propel students forward and achieve greater learning outcomes. Sheryl Faith is with me. She's the Dean of Academic Development and the IB coordinator at Leo Baeck Day School. Sheryl, how are you?
Hi.
Welcome. Let's talk about IB. What is IB?
Yes. Well, if you want me to explain IB, I'll try to keep it brief because it's kind of a long and wonderful story. But basically, International Baccalaureate, the organization was created basically in response to globalization. So this idea that people were actually moving from place to place and learning about different countries and things like that. And so they recognized a need for more kind of globalized education that really emphasized global citizenship. And so that was the initial. So it was initially created for high school it was called the diploma program. And diploma program is the one that most people know the best because it's been around the longest. But they saw a need for this in other, developmental levels as well. So they created the middle years program, which was for, middle school and kind of junior high school area. And then they created the primary years program for the younger students from kindergarten to either grade 5 or 6. And so basically they thought, well, we have an opportunity here to create a curriculum framework and philosophy that's based on the latest research and best practices in teaching. And that's what they do. And it influences schools in 160 countries. And there's about 5,000 schools that implement IB programs.
They talk about student agency as being a big part of differentiated learning and IB. Do you want to talk about how much priority is thrown at that, like student agency as part of the IB process at school?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I might start by defining student agency.
Please,
because I think people often don't really know what we mean by that. It's a little bit of edu-speak right now, but actually IB has been at the forefront of that. We've been talking about student agency for a long time. And I think, education is just starting to catch up in this area. But basically student agency, according to the IB, is 3 things. It's voice, choice, and ownership. And so the idea is that we really value student voice. We make sure that we use student feedback and ideas to modify, our teaching approaches or, the topics for an assignment or something like that. We use choice, which is, we allow students to choose how they'd like to express their understanding of a topic or, something like that. And then ownership is actually something that is very new to education because, it used to be a passive thing for students. They passively accepted knowledge from the teacher. Ownership is them feeling that they have ownership over the learning process. So a teacher might actually co-create a marking rubric with their students so that the students deeply understand what's expected of them and they understand the language because they're the ones that came up with it. So those are 3 very kind of powerful, kind of subheadings under student agencies. That's basically what it is.
Sorry to interrupt. How does that mesh with the curriculum though? If the students are trying to figure out how to grade themselves or what the structure should be around grading, like it doesn't change the curriculum at all. It just has to do with how they are marked.
It's just an approach. An approach. So, the curriculum. So again, and this is often a misconception. The IB doesn't influence content. They're not there to tell you what to teach, right? They just tell you well, here are the best practices. This is what we hold dear as IB educators. And this is what we believe is, based on research, based on brain science, this is what will allow for students to achieve at the highest level possible. And so we know that whatever content you're teaching, if you involve students in the process at different stages, they achieve at higher levels and they know themselves deeper as learners.
So that taps directly into differentiated learning then, right? Because
Yes.
they know themselves, the school, we're talking about how Leo Beck as a school really is valuing the fact that students come from different walks of life and different knowledge backgrounds and different, ways of learning and their skills and different ways of learning. So can you talk about how those two things intersect, the IB and differentiated learning?
Oh, the IB and how they intersect. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, so basically, and I like to see this as almost like a trickle down effect, right? So the IB mission statement kind of alludes to this, right? First and foremost. So we'll start at the highest level. So part of it says that we encourage students to become active, compassionate, lifelong learners who understand that other people with their differences can also be right. So it's the idea that different thinkers, people who learn differently, can also contribute a great deal and be correct in their understanding, right? So that's number one. You can interpret it a number of different ways. So that's one interpretation of it. But number two is we basically have, it's almost like the 10 Commandments, but they're the 6 approaches to teaching and learning in the IB. And one of those 6 is that the classroom is differentiated to meet the needs of all learners. So that is one of our quote unquote commandments of IB teaching. And not shockingly, the other 5 directly relate to differentiated instruction. So one of the 5 is that we formatively and summatively assess students, which means we assess them all throughout the learning process, not just at the end. And that informs us so that we know how to differentiate for students, right? So there's just, everything is interconnected. So all that is philosophical. So we're talking, we're very much talking theory, right? And then it trickles down into our practice. So we've got our planners. So we've got these specific planners that have differentiated instruction built in. Student agency is built in. So the way we plan and the lens through which we plan is influenced by differentiated instruction. And not only that, we also value the way that teachers even step into a lesson is meant to be, again, through this lens of knowing our students and valuing their voice, valuing who they are as unique learners. So it trickles down from theory into practice, and it has influenced our professional development across the board. So this is our pedagogical culture. We have invested a great deal throughout the year. We've had experts. These are incredible people who have come and worked with our staff to just reinforce all this great stuff that we are doing in the classroom relating to differentiated instruction. So it's just trickling right down throughout our pedagogical culture.
So how does IB and differentiated learning, how does that manifest itself in the classroom, and how do we see it working with the students?
Well, I think, if I'm going to sum it up into one statement, I would say that within an IB classroom, what you would see is a teacher that is not teaching to the average. And so traditionally, in traditional teaching, maybe in the teaching that we all grew up with, teachers, and this was part of instruction, they went through university and learned to do this. You basically taught and planned with this idea of the average student. In truth, we've learned over time that average student is a myth. There's no such thing as average anymore. There's just so many different ways that students are different that average doesn't exist. And so with differentiated instruction, a teacher would be teaching to the edges. They'd be teaching in a way so that the student who is at the earliest stage of understanding and the student who is just wants to go to the moon with their learning, they can both do it. And then that is an advantage to every student across that spectrum. So that really is in essence, what differentiated instruction is in general, and certainly within the IB.
And how does that look like at different ages, if we were to get a little bit more specific?
Okay, so like, what does it look like? So I'll start off by saying that in a differentiated classroom, I would look for a few things.
Okay.
So I would look for teachers who are diagnostically and formatively assessing students throughout a lesson or throughout a unit. I look for student agency, which we have already discussed. And I look for questions and experiences that keep students in their zone of proximal development, which is like a really fancy way of saying that they're keeping this balance where all students are challenged at their unique level without being overwhelmed or bored, right? That's kind of the idea. And so let's start with an older grade. So let's start with like a grade 6 math class.
Which is good, because that's exactly where I started my own personal like difficulties with staying focused.
Yes.
And like my grade, I think it was grade 8 science for me, but let's go with the older kids.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think I'm going to math because I think a lot of people think of math when they think of differentiated instruction, but I'll go somewhere else in a minute. But grade 6 math, and what's unfortunate is that there's a reason why people have such a visceral reaction to math. They either hate it or they loved it. And often that's because, again, the teacher was teaching for an average that didn't exist. So half the students probably just did not understand what was going on and hated it.
Right.
So a really effective teacher, let's say, I'm going to say that she began a new unit on prime numbers earlier that week, right? And if you want me to say prime numbers are numbers that only have like a factor of 1 in itself. You can't multiply anything else to get it, right?
I learned that at Leo Beck.
That's right, exactly. And basically, the students kind of have a pretty good understanding of what a prime number is at this stage. So she tells the students, choose a prime number, either from the list that I provided or come up with your own prime number and prove to me that it's a prime number. Pretend that I don't believe you. You're trying to convince me. So the students at an earlier stage of understanding might choose the number 5 and draw diagrams or written explanations, whatever they want, about why 5 is a prime number. The student with a much stronger understanding might choose the highest prime number they can think of.
37.
This is the student who wants to go to the moon, right? They'll choose, and I can't even think of the highest number I can think of.
37 is the one that popped in my mind. 37 is a good one.
There you go. Well, they might go to a number in the hundreds or thousands, right? It depends on where they're at, right? So they've kind of differentiated for themselves right there in that moment. And that's an example of student agency right there as well, right? Notice how they're all intertwining, right? And so that student who's going to the moon, they might write multiple equations to show the teacher, diagrams, explanations, whatever, to prove that their number is prime. So both students are doing the same task, right? One student isn't being, put into the corner and doing something different, right? They're both doing the exact same task, but they're approaching it in a way that best suits where they're at. The teacher might see a student choosing a number that's too easy, and they might encourage them to try a harder one. A student might choose one too hard, and the teacher might guide them to an easier one. The educator's job in this scenario is to keep those students in their zone of proximal development where they are challenged. And that is just a perfectly differentiated moment where they harness student agency and they were teaching to the edges where everybody could actually find an advantage, right? So that's one example. So that's grade 6 math. So let's say it's kindergarten. Now, the wonderful thing about kindergarten is because it is as play-based as it is, it has tons of student agency and it is very naturally differentiated. So within a K class, like a kindergarten class, let's say the class is beginning a unit on living and non-living things, right? A unit that exists in SK. The teacher might begin the lesson by putting various living and non-living objects on the table. They might ask students to first do a gallery walk. Let's look at the objects, tell the teacher what they see, think, and wonder about those objects. Then, this gives the teacher an initial diagnostic sense of the class's prior knowledge of these objects, so she knows how to continue. Then the teacher will tell the students to choose a number of objects to play with. And then we'll ask the students to group the objects however they like, based on an attribute of their choosing. A student with deeper understanding might naturally categorize the objects by living and non-living things. A student at an earlier stage of development might group them by color, but that's okay. The teacher can then engage the students in discussion about why they chose to categorize the way that they did. And then the students who grouped by living and non-living can stand up and explain and act as a provocation for further, defining living and non-living things. Now let's go on a nature walk. And I want you to document in pictures or writing, what is living and non-living around you. So those students, it's just open-ended enough so that they can access that learning wherever they're at. And again, play-based learning is just beautiful for that, because the students will push themselves, but if they're not pushing themselves enough, the teacher can start asking questions and developing their understanding further.
Yeah, the onus is a lot on the teachers in this format.
Yeah, but that's the whole point, is that it revolves around the teachers knowing their students. They have to know their students deeply. But there's you can see a lot of the onus is actually on the students as well, right? You're asking the students to make choices. And so, I think it should be a partnership. It should feel like a partnership between students and teachers. And it never did when I was growing up, I'll be honest. It really felt like I was being talked to.
Yeah.
And I was a brain to be filled, right? But we start from the point of this idea that their brains are already full, right? We just have to figure out where they're at, what's in their brains, what are they interested in, who are they as a learner, right?
And from what you've witnessed, this partnership between student and teacher at all levels is rather successful at Leo Baeck?
It is. I cannot tell you how powerful it is. It is a game changer in education. It's a complete game changer, because not only is the student enjoying the learning process more, the teacher enjoys the learning process more. There's so much more passion in that classroom when everybody is able to access the concepts being taught wherever they're at. Mm-hmm. And that's engaging, right? They're not teaching the same thing day in and day out the same way, right? Because the students might want to see it a different way, depending on whatever is inspiring in that moment. So mm-hmm. I think it's a really wonderful and validating way to approach learning, because it makes students feel capable. It makes teachers feel capable, and it just builds this kind of wonderful learning environment.
Thank you for listening to the Strategic Plan audio series. I encourage you to keep learning about what creates true educational excellence and how a strong Jewish independent school is flourishing right here in Toronto. For more information, visit leobeck.ca, go to the About drop-down menu, and find all you need to know on the Strategic Plan webpage.